As we kick off Autism Awareness Month, Easterseals Arkansas would like to welcome you to our very special webinar series, The Race for Understanding. We're excited to bring you this three-part series hosted by Easterseals Arkansas CEO Ron Ekstrand, featuring special guest Aaron Likens. Aaron serves as the Autism Ambassador for various Easterseals affiliates, is the author of the book Finding Kansas, and is currently living his dream as a flagman for the NTT IndyCar Series. During this webinar series, Aaron will share his advice, insights, and personal experiences of living on the autism spectrum, covering three different topics: education, employment, and independent living. In this second webinar, we'll focus on employment and autism, where Aaron will share what it has been like being an employee in a variety of settings. His insights will be useful to job seekers, employers, and coworkers. We'll also open up the discussion for a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please send us your questions in the Q&A tab. Thank you for joining us, and please enjoy this insightful discussion.
Welcome to today's program. My name is Ron Ekstrand, and I am the CEO of Easterseals Arkansas. We'll be having a conversation today with Aaron Likens on the topic of employment and autism as part of our three-part webinar series, A Race for Understanding. Aaron, we've known each other for about a dozen years, and we've done work together. So that the rest of the folks who are tuning in know a little bit more about you, could you describe your journey about being diagnosed and your eventual writing of the book, Finding Kansas?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed December 2003, so age 20, later in life, but all the signs were there ahead of time, but nobody knew what to really make of me growing up. It was Asperger's in the 90s. What is that? So diagnosed, and even in 2003, not much information about it. My doctor didn't even really know what it was. So he told me good luck. I had to look it up on the internet, got bad information. 15 months, stayed super depressed, but flip side of that though, started writing. Never intended on writing a book, but it was my outlet to communicate with the world because I couldn't talk about emotions, couldn't give an opinion that wasn't outside of hard facts. So writing was my way to really express who I was with the world. And again, never intended on writing a book, and truly never intended on being employed because I wrote a book, but that's how it played out.
So your book had then led to speaking engagements, talking about some of the ideas, the concepts, and your, I guess, journey. When did you give your first presentation, and how many presentations have you given?
First presentation was to the Missouri National Educators Association statewide conference in about August of 2009. And since that first one, it was, that's been 1,034 presentations. So closing in on 100,000 people spoken to in person. Can't wait to get to that number, but so blessed to do 1,034 presentations.
So when you were young growing up, and you were thinking about what you wanted to do, what was that dream that you had for yourself in terms of your ideal job?
Ideal job, without a doubt, from my first memories, was to be a race car driver. That's the only thing I thought of, only thing I ever envisioned doing.
And you grew up within a couple miles of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, just about 2 miles from the track. So during the month of May, my dad was a pastor, so couldn't go to the race because race is on a Sunday. But after school in May, we would be going to the practice on the weekends, going to qualifying, and each time I went, that's going to be me out there, no doubt.
And so you got involved in racing when you were young, racing go-karts, and then got into flagging there. Let's talk a little bit about that experience and how you got that first I guess, job as a 12 or 13-year-old?
Yeah, so started racing karts when I was 12, which that wasn't oddly enough the job that I would be doing, but I wanted to race in the Indy 500, but I also thought the flagman was pretty cool as well. And when I was 7, the flagman of the Indy 500 actually gave me one of his checkered flags. So that was the only other way to get one of those flags is to win the race. So very rare feat there, but that got me interested in the flag side of racing. So started racing in St. Louis when I was 12, and the club had a flagman who was mid 80s. And colors started to be an issue with him. So as a driver, we didn't know if the race was going to start with the green flag, which means go, or the red flag, which means stop immediately. We were always on edge on what we would see. So I volunteered to hand him the right flag. And over that first season, he started letting me do a heat race here or there. And halfway through my second season, they sort of pushed him aside, worried about his health and just the consistency of the flag. So age 13 became the club flagman, which thinking back, I just can't believe insurance wise, who's going to let a 13-year-old be in charge of the track? But in terms of the flags, that's what I was doing, and kept racing and kept flagging. I was there until about 2006 with the St. Louis Karting Association as their flagman.
So your dream of being a race driver changed. You've often described your presentations and your being a public speaker and your writing as a different race, a race for understanding and awareness. I should have mentioned earlier that you've been named one of the flagmen for the Indianapolis Racing Series. Wow, what an honor. How many people have ever been flagmen of the Indianapolis 500?
Since 1960 of the 500, about 6 or 7 people. So right now I serve as the role as one of the starters along with Tom Hansing and Brian Howard. So there's 3 of us that work the series. And thinking back to those times going to the track when I was 5, 4, I'm still trying to make sense of what it's like to have a dream come true. Wow.
It would actually be easier to win the Indianapolis 500 than to be a flagman for the Indianapolis 500, given that time frame.
Oh, for sure. Dozens of winners and only 6, 7.
Got it. So your book, Finding Kansas, tell us about the title and what that means. It's obviously not about the Wizard of Oz or the state, but what is it about?
So the title concept of my book, Finding Kansas, it's has nothing to do with the state. Thank goodness. If you drive across it, I'm sorry. 8 hours of your life you can never get back. But it's a concept clinicians, or I think it's worded like this in the DSM, that people on the autism spectrum will have an area to find interest or knowledge that they're going to want to talk about to the exclusion of everything else. That works. It's kind of wordy. It doesn't give somebody a visual image. So came up with the concept of Kansas, that if you could only function in the state of Kansas and you were socially paralyzed in every other state except Kansas, you're going to want to live in the state of Kansas. And Kansas for us on the autism spectrum is going to be that activity, interest, or job that we're going to want to talk about to the exclusion of everything else. And we're going to maybe talk about it for 6 hours nonstop and not take a breath and have no idea that you're not listening, but we are going to have the time of our lives.
And so for you growing up, your Kansas was race cars, the weather, anything else?
Video games would definitely be on that list. But racing was definitely the capital of Kansas.
Got it. And so in school, you didn't know that you had autism or Asperger's. And as you were thinking about your sort of jobs after school, what were you thinking beyond racing? Was there anything beyond racing?
There is nothing beyond racing. My teachers, they tried to steer me in a direction. Oh, Aaron, you're smart. Don't you want to be a doctor? Or what about a weatherman? And I would look at them and sort of just get that confused look and go,
Why would you want to do that?
that's exact. Why would I want to do that? I'm going to race cars. And there was no give or take on those conversations. The teachers just looked at me and dismay, and I looked at them and dismay as, why are you trying to tell me that I'm going to do something when I'm clearly going to do this?
Gotcha. Would there have been anything, any kind of program or an approach to, say, when you were in junior high or high school that could have worked with you to explore other things, to get experience, anything along those lines that would have helped you plan for your career?
Back then, I don't think there was much like there is today. I know high schools now have, depending on the high school, STEM classes that there's actually, oddly enough, flagged in 2016 and 17. I flagged it was a collaboration between USAC and Purdue University, but it was there were university students, and then there was a high school division where kids were making their own battery go-kart and then racing it. So something like that, I would have been all over. And one of my weaknesses in racing was always my lack of mechanical knowledge. Watching me attempt to use a screwdriver is an entertaining thing. I just don't. That's one of my weaknesses I have, just the concept of tools and mechanics. I don't know how anything works. So if I would have learned that early,
It would have helped you.
Yes,
Gotcha.
definitely.
So what prepared you for this dream job? If you think about, one day I'd like to be at the Indianapolis 500, or I want to flag the Indianapolis 500, what were the things that helped you along the way or prepared you for it?
So when as society reopens and I start giving my full presentation that I've done for the past decade, I've always previously talked about seeds being planted, about my teachers and the seeds they planted. And I never really considered what each job I had, what it was adding to the harvest to come. Every job I had added something. Even though I may have not liked the job I may have been miserable at the job, but the skills there learned, you're learning skills you don't know you need. My first job was at a bowling alley, cleaning tables. But while doing that, there were still interactions with the customers. Those interactions led to my second job, which was at a video game store. And I loved video games, obviously, but I also loved Monopoly. Well, sales is just a real life version of Monopoly. It's the sales clerk's goal to get the consumer to part with as much money as possible. I was ruthless at the age of 18. It was just a big old game. I wanted to be number one in every category. My third job was at a video duplicator. And the routine of that was huge in the racing world. I came off this past weekend working a SCUSA, a Supercarts USA race, a go-kart series in New Orleans last weekend. And there I'm the head flagger as well, but on the radio, do the same thing every single time. If you do it one way, do it every single time. That way, everybody that's watching or hearing you knows exactly what's going on. Don't deviate with words. Don't deviate with movements. At the video duplicator, it was a very routine job. Put 74 VHS tapes, which 74, I like round numbers, so 75 would have been a lot better, but no, 74. Anyway, put 74 VHS tapes in, let the program run, it duplicates, take 74 VHS tapes out, label the top, label the spine, assemble the VHS jacket, put it in a box, repeat that as many times as the day allows. That routine, don't deviate. The more you stick to the routine. The faster the routine is, the more things that can go out. So that was very vital to being that professional at a racetrack on same way every single time. Of course, being on the autism spectrum, I like routines as is, but being able to transfer the love of routines to also being just rigid on the routine. I became then a race director for a go-kart series in Missouri, and that too, it's one thing just to be the flagger, but then when you're the race director, you are I don't want to say debates with the competitors, but they will protest a call, and there you then have to have empathy with their complaint, and you're not reversing your call most of the time, but you have to be very empathetic and see it from their point of view and let them know you see it from their point of view, and then say why whatever the rule was or the call was is going to be the way it is. But all those also then helped me being a public speaker, video game store, that persona of talking and getting your point across. As a public speaker, that's exactly what you're doing. You have to be confident in what you're saying. You have to be able to speak, and when I present, I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. If I have to think about what I'm saying, I'm behind. I'm going to start overthinking, and I'm going to be speaking like that. So it's very important to stay ahead of that thought process, which means you need to know your stuff, which, going back to each job I had, the more I knew, the procedures, the sales, it just made everything smoother. And I don't want to say it got around the processing delays that I may have in terms of open-ended conversations outside of the workplace, but when each job was perfected, people would say, especially in jobs where now they know I'm on the autism spectrum, and some people don't like hearing this, but they'll say, whoa, I never would have thought you were on the autism spectrum. I think that's part compliment. I know other people on the spectrum just cringe when they hear that. But in the right environment, for those that don't know what they're looking for, yeah, it's going to be like that.
So you've described some of your work experiences, and I think one of the messages that you have in there is that, and I'm also very visual and like analogies. It'd be like you're picking up skills or abilities and you're putting them in your backpack that you take with you to the next job, and you're not sure when you're going to need that tool or that skill, but by being willing to learn in each one of those different jobs, you picked up things that served you later. So the job that you may be doing today may not be what you do for the rest of your life. So in terms of advice for someone who might be on the spectrum thinking about what they want to do for a job, what advice would you have for folks?
Growing up, the jobs I had, the bowling alley, the duplicator, and most of the time at the video game store, I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't. Those weren't my Kansases or Kansas. I don't know the plural of Kansas. The video game store wasn't bad when talking with customers about the games I enjoyed, but I was oblivious to that progression, the skills in the backpack. I was oblivious to that concept. I was only thinking, I'm not racing a car right now. Why am I doing this? But the skills learned got me to a thing that was way cooler, in my opinion, now than what I originally wanted to do. Don't get me wrong. I still wish I was the first 5-time winner of the Indy 500. Definitely wish that would have happened. But what I've done other than that is pretty cool as well. So those skills learned, have an open mind. I know that's hard for me to say because it was hard for me to have an open mind in my late teens, 20s. But those skills, you just have no idea where life's going to take you. You won't have any idea the opportunities you may have. And I know I'll have conversations with people about racing, and I say what I do on a racetrack, especially at a kart track where I am on the track surface, sometimes having to run around carts, pick carts up out of the track. And people go, why would you want to do that? That sounds horrible. So the opportunities each person's going to have is going to be unique to who they are. What I absolutely love doing, most people would run away and absolutely want no part of it. But for me, that's what I want. For other individuals, they may get those same opportunities on a job that they never would have even considered doing. And it's going to be a dream job. Having no idea, 10 or even 20 years before they get it, just having no idea. And that I'm so excited down the road to sort of talk about this more as I formulate, maybe a book or a presentation on employment, on just the odd way that a dream can come true without you even knowing you had the dream in the first place.
Got it. Part of this notion of building out a career comes from, I think, an idea like Kansas, where you're building on something that you're interested in and you're passionate about, you want to talk about, you want to learn about. So is that also a message that you have, is that build on your strengths and your interests, and then figure out how those skills can help you get to that job of interest?
Absolutely. And sadly and unfortunately, the unemployment rate for those with Asperger's hovers around 80%. And I believe a big part of that is that there's just a Kansas mismatch. Burnout for me was something I did suffer with. I'd do a job for 6 months. I didn't have the knowledge that I was learning skills. I didn't realize that I was progressing within the job and becoming more as a person. It's hard when a person's growing, it's hard to know that you are growing, that you are getting better at something. It's hard to think back of what that first day of work was like compared to where you are 6 months down the road. It just sort of starts blending together, and it's, oh, I was always this good at the job. No, at the beginning, it may have been rocky. So looking at that, the skills that you are learning, just so vital.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the exact words to say, hey, stick with it. Don't get burnt out, just stick with it, because I struggled with that. But avoiding that burnout and seeing that, and we all want everything right now. I mean, I think that's a human trait, not just being on the spectrum trait, but we think of a career roadmap. We see point A, we see point B, and it should just be an easy, straight freeway to it, not realizing that the road may have a bunch of detours, a bridge out, but that journey that you're taking, you are picking up skills all the way. And I think if I would have got to IndyCar any sooner, I wouldn't have been ready. That I think is another reason why the unemployment rate may be so high. If you get your dream job and you don't have the skills to go with it, it's going to be a double whammy of misfortune, because you weren't ready and you're going to be in that position without the skills you need. So socially, it's going to be awkward. People may get angry. But secondly, you had your dream job and lost it.
Mm.
So getting those skills before you get what you really want, so huge.
So in terms of skills, maybe skills that you didn't think you needed that have come in very handy, are there some generic, like, job related skills that you think have benefited you and that others might want to consider, just as general skills that are useful to be successful at work?
Absolutely. The interpersonal politics of the workplace, not in terms of national politics, but just the mood in the office or wherever you're working, was early on very hard for me to navigate. the video game store. There were some employees that were only working there because the manager liked them. They didn't do anything, and they spent more time wandering the mall than they did actually in the store that they were being paid to work at. That made no sense to me. And so I always complained about it. I always protested, and protesting was by the book, the right thing, because they're being paid just as much as I am, and they're not doing anything. But at the same time, I'm just an entry-level person. That's not my place to say. Another thing is under the same line. Oh, this was a great story. Learning when and when not to speak up. So a competitive store moved into the mall, the video game store I worked at, and where I worked, reservations were $10. At the other store, it was $5. Now, one of the big stats that was kept track of were reservations. Now, at the end of the day, a $10 reservation and a $5 reservation for the same price game is the same price at the end. But psychologically, $5 before is a whole lot less than 10. So our numbers went way down. So I took it upon myself on it's amazing they had this technology in 01, but they had in our sales computer email system that you could email corporate. So I wrote this wonderfully, I mean, if it would have been, I felt like I was writing, going for my MBA. It was thesis level. I must have spent all day on it, and I sent it. Now, I had no idea where it would go. Little did I know that email actually went straight to the CEO. Well, a week later, the manager calls me into the back room and he says, Aaron, never email corporate ever again. We almost got fired, especially you, but also me. But, oh, by the way, reservations are now $5. That chain of command is so important. That's something I struggled with all the way to about the past maybe 6 years, that you report to the person next. You don't email the CEO when you're at entry level. So that is a skill, definitely, just learning the workplace and how it functions. Because in my mind, one of my most important sayings about autism is logical and emotional world. There should be no emotional response from a manager if I go 7 rungs above them. The way it plays out in reality, though, is there most certainly is. And if you want everybody, when you need help, to have your back, you can't constantly be pushing buttons that the buttons that are there may make no sense, but they do exist. You can't just turn emotions off as much as I would like. You just can't do that. So those skills that you learn early on in a job, just that, the chain of command. So I think I've said so vital so many times, but it's so vital.
Yep. So we've got probably some employers or people who are helping individuals with autism and developmental disabilities find work. If you think about your skill set and the strengths that you have being on the spectrum, what are the things that you bring to the table that employers may be missing out if they're not recruiting people that happen to be on the spectrum?
I used to joke in my presentation that myself on the job, or for, let's say, company X somewhere, if you have a bunch of individuals on the spectrum working, okay, the Christmas party may not be the most entertaining thing because they're going to be talking about the project, the job. Well, that's one of the strengths. When we're in Arkansas, you're going to want a person that their job is Arkansas, because then you're going to get that extra % or 2 that other people just may not be able to give. It is almost our life that, hey, this is our interest. We're going to take one of the sayings I have is that you can't fake passion. And when you get that individual on the spectrum that absolutely whatever the job is, if it's in the industry they love, the passion's just going to seep through. You're not going to, people are going to see that person go, wow, they love this job. They know this job. So the strengths, the passion, the adherence to the rules, the routine, so critical. And potentially, if it's an IT job or a creative job, some individuals on the spectrum can think outside of the box and come up with a solution that maybe nobody's ever seen before, or ask a question, hey, wouldn't it be better if we did it this way? And may come up with an approach that nobody's ever thought of before.
Great. And speaking of questions, in about 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to start taking questions from the audience. I should have mentioned that earlier. So if you've got questions, please send them in through the Q&A. I've got a question here, and this was one that it sounds like it's coming from employers, an employer. How could employers or the work environment be adjusted to be more inclusive for someone on the spectrum to avoid that burnout?
Oh, that is a good question. To avoid the burnout. That's a very good question. Avoiding the burnout is critical. I would say recognizing when they're got it. So the social dynamic, when there was friction, it would wear. And my personal problem, I don't know if other people on the spectrum share this, but when I would go home, it wasn't like I was really away from the job. I would always be thinking about it. And if there was a social mismatch or a misunderstanding with a coworker, that would wear on me. This was a learning experience for me, but at my first job at the bowling alley, I was headed somewhere over the weekend, and I told another coworker to tell the manager that I wouldn't be in. Okay, I didn't understand. Okay, you don't do that. You tell the manager directly, because the telephone game, so to speak, of person A tells person B, and you don't know if the message is going to get from B to C. So I got called the evening that we were on the road, headed somewhere. Hey, where are you? So, well, didn't the person say I wasn't coming in? That person doesn't work here anymore. So, so obviously the message didn't get through.
Yeah.
But that stayed with me for a while. Now, that's an extreme story, but just if take the person at the video game store that was there and could just have free reign of the mall. Okay, that wore on me. And a mall with everybody working there under the age of 20 might not be the same as working in a professional environment with an office and such, but that wore on me. So being aware of when there is a thing bugging, because when I am having an issue with something, another one of my sayings is, I think, therefore you should know. So since I know it, everybody else already knew it. So I wouldn't speak up about what my problem was or what my issue was, because in my mind, everybody else knew it. So understanding those two things and trying to have well, of course, I wish everything were a peaceful resolution, but a non-confrontational resolution, and understanding where the person on the spectrum is coming from on what may be bothering them, and trying to find the best outcome for all parties involved.
So would something like having a mentor or a buddy that you could go to say, hey, something doesn't make sense, I think I may have stepped in it, and here's the situation, to help you read the social situation, or even explicit skill training on conflict resolution and how to have a conversation to resolve some sort of social dispute?
Absolutely. on my path, one of the jobs I had for a couple months in 2003 was race car driving instructor at a race car driving school in Las Vegas. And somebody was exactly like that for me. And each job I've seen that I've had since, there has been someone like that. And that there is no words I can give to how critical and how important that is as problems arise. If you have somebody those first 3 or 4 times, okay, you can pick up on those cues. You can pick up on how they handled it, and then put those skills in the backpack for later when you may need them down the road.
Got it. Another question coming in from one of our viewers. What about the interview process? What could have been done differently to make recruiting or interviewing easier for you for some of the jobs you've applied for?
I would say practice for sure. I'm glad there's no video of my interview at the video game store. It was the world's worst job interview.
How'd you get it?
Oh, well, thinking, okay.
You think it was a social psychological experiment to see how you would do?
That's exactly what it was. I'm not kidding. That's exactly what it was. So every question the manager asked, I said, I don't know to. Do you have any sales experience? Well, does selling or renting people bowling shoes at a bowling alley, does that count? So I was hung up on that. So I said, I don't know. Do you have any management experience? Well, does flagging a racetrack count as It's actually more, but I didn't have manager in my job. I don't know. It was 10 minutes of me over processing every question, not knowing the technicality or the exactness of what is the criteria of managing. So I 48 hours later hadn't heard anything, so I called the video game store, got the manager, and he said, oh yeah, you're hired. And hey, I got the job. Now I knew I did a bad job, so I wondered how bad everybody else that interviewed did, because there was no reason why I should get that job. But after about 2 months, when my sales numbers were really good, he said, Aaron, do you know why I hired you? I said, I don't know. He said, oh, I heard I don't know a lot in your interview, but I hired you to see how big of a train wreck you would be.
Oh my gosh. Turns out you were their top salesperson.
Yeah. So maybe that proves that you can't judge a person by their interview, because I gave the world's worst job interview, and he hired me to be a disaster. That can't be a good reason to hire someone.
No.
But
I just hope none of my hiring managers do that.
But it shows
Yeah.
the whole don't judge a book by its cover, because I failed the interview and gave them their top sales numbers.
Well, I meant to ask you this earlier. It's a concept in your book, Finding Kansas. And it relates to how is it that you're able to sit here and answer these questions, or sell books, or manage a race? What is it that allows you to navigate this situation?
Yes. So in my book, I have a chapter entitled Alias, which I now compare it to the movie Catch Me If You Can, in that it's playing a role. It's being able to sort of be a chameleon and play whatever role is needed. And at the video game store, I was the video game advisor. So I wasn't Aaron Likens. I was Aaron, the nameless game advisor, who the customer would probably never see again. So there was nothing personal about the role, which cuts out 98% of all processing, because I can talk about facts, no problem. Talk about myself in terms of opinions, then I start over processing. So at the racetrack, same thing. I was the race director or the flagman, where there's a set amount of rules. You follow those rules, you execute the plan. So the alias concept, when I wrote it, I definitely thought back to all those days at the video game store, because it was such a difference. And my coworkers there did notice that. He hired me to be a disaster, and socially on the job, I was chit-chatting, small talking. I thinking back, I if they had to describe me in one word, it would either be aloof or a jerk. I wasn't intending on being that. I just wasn't diagnosed at that point in time. And I went to work to work.
Yeah.
And they wanted to talk about movies or music or celebrity gossip. I don't know anything about that. I can't fake knowing anything about that. So if they started talking to me about that, I'd listen for a second and just turn around and start alphabetizing the store. So that's where I wish I would have been diagnosed at that point in time to know, hey, you may have the alias and be an excellent salesperson, but you still have to socialize with your coworkers and you can't ignore their existence.
Got it. So in roles where things are clearly defined, you know what the expectations are, you know what the process or the steps are, you know how the score is being kept and what the measures are, you tend to flourish in that kind of environment. So kind of a note to employers, the more you can define the expectations and help an individual understand their role, the resources they have available, the more effective they can be in that role. What about orientation as you're coming into a new organization? What are some things that, and this is a question that's been sent in from a viewer, what are some things that you think employers could do to make you feel more welcome and to help you adjust with the onboarding as a new employee, as you think back to some of the jobs you've had?
Obviously, don't let me know that I was hired to be a disaster. That's a good start. Learning the routine, learning the lay of the land, where working's going to be. At the same time, though, don't overwhelm. I know I've talked about routine, but if you try to show everything at once, okay, I go there at 9, I go there at 10, person A is there, person B, but person A may be where person B. Don't give just a deluge of information that could be picked up. And this is for me. Other individuals may want the whole menu all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, I would struggle with that. So for me, starting small would be great. If there's a big team, don't have and this is for me, if you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism, but don't do a onboard party where you're going to meet every one of your coworkers at once. Let the alias sort of slowly develop in the workplace. And that can be done over a day, of course, but don't have just a big welcoming party where you're going to meet everybody. But I have a hard time remembering names, especially if I'm in the process of just scared to death that I'm going to be fired. Every job I've had every day in my mind is the last. So that makes it very difficult to learn names and other things when I'm just making sure that
you're trying not to get fired today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
gotcha.
So even on the hiring process, okay, you have the job, it's your first day. Okay, it's sort of like thinking back to school, that first day of school, you're thinking, okay, just don't get in trouble, fly under the radar. That's sort of going in my mind on that first day on the job. Just don't mess up. You don't want people knowing your name on the first day for the wrong reasons.
Got it. Another question that's come in, this is for maybe teenagers who are thinking about work, but what suggestions do you have to help teenagers realize that they will most likely not just start working in their dream job and they're going to have to pay some dues? What do you do to help them embrace opportunities and jobs that they might not think are great to start with in their careers?
Yes. So maybe a visual metaphor of sorts, or a visual, that backpack, as you said, great example that, yeah, nobody is going to get that dream job right away. And I think describe, okay, if you are talking to that 18-year-old, okay, if you got your dream job today, would you be able to do it? I think that's another thing that in this conversation we've had that is key for people to understand is if you do get that job, I mean, myself, could I have displayed the flags properly at Indianapolis a decade ago? Absolutely. Was I ready for it? Was I ready for the personal conversations that I've had during the job? A decade ago, no. How long would I have lasted a season? Maybe, but I wouldn't have been able to have the friendships now I've had with the people I work with. It's taken time.
Mm-hmm.
So those jobs you get early, it might not even be a desirable job, but it's going to get you ready, get you on the path to getting ready for what you're going to do eventually. And even if you could do that dream job at 18, if you're not ready for it, if you get it, how long are you actually going to have it?
Got it. So it sounds like, you're talking about developing skills, some of which are going to be useful for that dream job, like how to drive a race car or how to do the flags. But some of the skills you were learning, you didn't really have a line of sight. Even if you knew that's what you wanted to do, you didn't know that the interpersonal skills or the ability to lay the lines or whatever else that you had to learn, the routine for, you didn't maybe see that. So what encouragement do you have for students or early job seekers?
If they're into video games, use a video game concept such as a Final Fantasy or RPG type game, to where, okay, you may be a great player when you start the game, but the people on the game, your characters, don't have the skill set to take on the final boss of the game. You may know the right strategy, but if your characters do not have the skill sets and haven't acquired the skills to take on the final boss, even if the game let you right off the bat take on the final, whatever it may be, the characters just will not, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's no way to do it.
You got to level up.
Absolutely.
Develop those skills.
And that's what those early jobs are. There was a game, Final Fantasy Tactics, where each character had a different job, and the skill tree was very immense, but you had to build each character in that job to build the skills to maybe move on to the dream job within the game.
Got it. So before you got your dream job, what was your favorite job that you've had?
Before being a presenter, and I'm not going to count the race car driving school because that's just
that's right there with your dream job.
That was, yeah,
teaching people how to drive a race car.
Yeah, or just going around the track needlessly for extra time when no one's watching. Good times. The video game store, definitely, because I was, and if I had the skills of today, I could handle talking. I would know the path to take with the coworkers, but back then I didn't have that set. So it was a really good job for me. In a way, I wasn't ready for that job as well. Which sometimes, another bit of encouragement is failure is a learning opportunity. If you do, my job at the video game store ended prematurely, not of my own doing, but I had to not be there anymore.
Understand.
So had that been my dream job, that would have been just, anyway, that was a learning, yes, that's what I was saying. It's a learning opportunity. You can go into the next job and people there might not know what happened at the previous job, but keep moving forward. It's never a game over. And it's never a straight line either, but there's always that ability to restart and keep going.
Okay. Here's another question that's one of our viewers sent in. What's your worst nightmare scenario on the job?
Worst nightmare, besides having a job come to an end, is that social dynamic of the unknown. this is going to sound odd for this to be considered worst nightmare, but an email or a text that says, "Hey, we need to talk later." Okay.
Without knowing what the topic is, that creates a lot of fear.
Of fear, and I tend to be a worst case scenario thinker.
Mm.
A lot of us on the spectrum tend to be that way. For myself, the reason why is processing, as I mentioned, takes longer. So I have to prepare myself to what's going to happen. Now you see, we need to talk later. Okay, what comes to mind when we need to talk later? Is it, hey, you've done a great job, here's a bonus? No, it's this went wrong and this went wrong and this went wrong. This is why everything is awful. That's what comes to my mind when we need to talk later. So those up in the air statements without direction. And of course, I think this is everyone's fear, getting a task and having absolutely no idea what to do. That too, big nightmare right there. And usually that type of situation will lead to a, we need to talk later.
So one of the things that was interesting when you were talking to the students that you were over at UA Little Rock, where we have our ACE program, we've got students there that are getting work experience, internship experience, also a college experience, learning job skills. And we were talking about the idea of asking for help, which was very difficult for you to do, instead of waiting until you've made the mistake and then having to ask for help when it has to be done over. So can you describe that experience?
Yes, and this is going to be a hard thing to learn. Myself, I will try to avoid socializing at all costs. Path of least resistance is avoiding conversations. Avoid conversations, and it's a good day. However, when you need help, you come to a junction on one path, and being help is, okay, you're unsure of the task, you might not know what to do, or maybe somebody gave you an assignment that you truly can't do.
So the example you used, you were working at the cart shop, and you have no idea about the tools.
So as mentioned, my weakness is mechanics, and one of my jobs along the way was working at a cart shop, and the shop owner asked me to go get this part, that part, this part, and that part. Another thing is I have short-term memory issues. So when you give me a long list of things, I'm going to go out to the shop and go, okay, this was something and that was something that I don't know what they are. And I wouldn't have known what they were even if I had remembered. So you get to a junction. You can either grab 4 items and hope that you get it right, or you can ask for help and do it right. Well, back then in 2006, I went with the pick 4 random items and hope I'm right. I wasn't right.
Which led to some
extra
socially awkward interactions.
So logically, you can do one of 2 things when you get to that junction. Don't say anything and hope you do it right. And that may work sometimes. But when it doesn't, it's going to be a problem. Or you can ask, what did you mean by? Or I'm new, I don't know what this is. Some along those lines. And I would hope a manager, an owner, or whoever you're working for will respect that you want to do it right. You're not going to just try to phone it in and get lucky on what you're doing, that you want to do it right. So asking the owner manager, can you show me what you mean so I can do it right all the other times that you want, instead of just hoping, because hoping, eventually it's going to catch up with you and you're going to have a longer conversation than if you were to simply ask for help in the first place.
Very good. So I think we're going to have time for maybe just 2 more questions. This next one is also from a viewer. So what about disclosing to your employer that you are on the spectrum? Is that a good idea? When do you suggest doing that? Do you do that in the interview? What's your thoughts about that?
I will practice being a politician by answering the question without answering the question by saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. It's going to depend on what the person is comfortable with. There's a strength and potential weakness to each course of action there. If you come across somebody that unfortunately is ignorant of what the autism spectrum is, okay, will that person have no idea what it is and be unfortunately fearful or have just a negative, what does that mean type thought. On the flip side of that, well, since I wrote a book, it's kind of hard for me to hide the fact that I have it, but I am very open about it. When I started with IndyCar, I let each of my workers at the appropriate time know. And I remember a situation at our season finale in St. Pete while we were setting up, and I know exactly where I was on the track when this happened. I don't remember the exact words, but it was really funny. But it was a literal fail. I was told to do something, and I did it exactly how the sentence was, but it wasn't what was the intended outcome.
Got it.
So thankfully he already knew, and I said, hey, guess what? We just had our first literal mismatch. And we both laughed about it, and everything was great. I mean, nothing dire took place from that. But it was one of those learning experiences for him and myself that if I hadn't disclosed it, okay, is he just trying to be funny by taking this literally? Is he trying? So people may eventually come to the conclusion that someone is, and if they know up front, if you are in a good work environment, you're going to have more understanding and might be able to avoid a lot of the misunderstandings.
Got it. So last question, again from a viewer. So through the years, how has your growing understanding of autism helped you in your job and in your career?
It's definitely helped me learning how to navigate the social dynamic of the workplace. I think we started with that sort of, but that is the most important thing. There's, I remember this was probably a couple months after you had me start blogging in 2010, but I got an email from someone that they were either from Iceland or Norway, working in northern Canada in the petroleum fields, but dual doctorate, almost 7-figure job, and they couldn't do it. They were one of the world's leading experts on, I didn't even know what they did, but her email to me was this genius mind that had no idea how to navigate the social aspect of the job, and she got to the point that she couldn't even get herself back home. That was somebody that she was young, got that job, didn't have the skill set. So that's what we talked about, getting that job too early without the skills in the backpack. So myself learning how to navigate those, just the everyday chit chat, the friction that may come up with employees or coworkers, and know how to diffuse and how to laugh about it later. So critical. And that thing in 2010 that really motivated me back then, and thinking about it now, is a big thing on why you need that, just everyone on board with understanding and acceptance. Because if you get that job too soon, and we've come a long ways in 2010, maybe a work environment now would be much more accepting and inclusive than it was 11 years ago. I like to think that, but same thing from now. We look ahead from what 11 years from now is going to look like. In 2032, we're going to look back and go, boy, we didn't know what we were doing in 2021. So it's a ever evolving, ever growing thing. And programs like this today, I hope, just keeps moving the ball down the field. But I don't know if we'll ever get to the end zone, because it's just going to be an ever ongoing process.
Thank you, Aaron. And I appreciate you sharing your story. Love the book. Again, Aaron Likens, Finding Kansas. He's the author. Also, flagman for the Indianapolis 500 that will be coming up in a couple of months. So thank you today for joining us as we explore the topic of employment with our guest, Aaron Likens. We hope that you have left today with some more insight, understanding, and acceptance, and perhaps an idea or two that you can put into practice. If you're able, please join us for the final webinar in this three-part series, The Race for Understanding. At 5:30, we will be talking about independent living and autism. Aaron will share his story then. Again, we will have questions and answers at the end. We encourage you to learn more about Aaron as well as the services that we provide here at Easterseals. Some of those services include employment services, transition services to help students in high school get ready for work, the ACE program that we have over at UA Little Rock. So please check that out on our website. If you haven't registered for the last webinar, please visit eastersealsar.com and register now. We will also be having recordings of this and the other two webinars available on Easterseals Arkansas's YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe and like our video. Thank you again for tuning in.